so many other people. Kim Lewis, you mentioned earlier, down in New Orleans. Just there's so many different men and women who have been able to be shining examples that no matter what area of the industry you want to pursue, whether it is marketing or writing or actual winemaking, you can do it. And I think it doesn't take a celebrity. It's nice. Like Dwayne Wade's wines are amazing. I love the work that he's doing in the space. And you see all these different celebrities making tequilas and vodkas and whatever the like. But I think what the Black community or Black Americans, what they've had to see over the last several years, I'll say 10 to 15 years, they've had to just see that it's...
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. We are in beautiful Southern California. Well, not so beautiful today, but a little bit of rain and a little bit of chill. But for us, it's great. About to have a conversation with Chasity Cooper out in Chicago. Introductions in just a minute. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting, and always sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now in its 50th year, supporting the Napa and Bordeaux series of wines. Here to have a conversation with Chasity Cooper, Chicago-based wine writer, entrepreneur, wine culture expert, blogger, disruptor, flag waver, and making a difference in our industry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. What an intro. That was awesome.
I just took it right off of the web. I didn't make any of this stuff up. I was listening to a podcast that you were on in 2019. I'd asked you if you were still living in Brooklyn, because at that moment you announced that you lived there. And you said, no, you're in Chicago, which is where you started your life, right?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Galveston, Texas, lived there for a little bit, and then moved to beautiful Evanston, Illinois when I was a third grader, and considered Evanston home until I decided to go to the East Coast, did school. I went to Syracuse, go Orange, and then spent some time on the East Coast, lived in DC for several years, and before coming back to Chicago in 2019, I spent a couple years in Brooklyn. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything.
Get around, girl. Get around. The reason I brought the Brooklyn part was a little bit because it was a fascinating conversation, too, that you had with a gentleman, I don't think he's a wine writer, but just a podcaster, but it was really fun to listen to. But my daughter was there, and we visited quite often, and she also often took me to wine shops. And so we hopped on the train and went out to Brooklyn. I think it was called Vine and Wine. Does that ring a bell with you?
That sounds familiar, yeah.
It was a little shop. In fact, this is what's fascinating about the wine business on the East Coast, which is totally different than the West Coast. We have these giant stores, BevMo's, Total Wines, even the entrepreneurial stores are huge. I mean, they're by standards of what I've seen, let's just say in New York. This store in Brooklyn must have had maybe 200 SKUs at the most. And up and down the New York, state of New York, because my daughter lives in Albany now, we've gone through the Hudson River area and all that, and the stores are tiny, but they have, what's interesting is the variety of wines that come into the East Coast compared to the West Coast is fascinating to me. I don't recognize anything. Anyway, so we were talking about natural wines there. So I took my daughter. She goes, you got to buy this wine, Dad. So it was like, first of all, it was like $75. And it was a Nero d'Avola from Sicily. We took it home, and it was literally unpalatable. It wasn't a bad bottle, just the whole concept. And this is probably 10 or 15 years ago. So as a wine person, let's just start with that. What do you consider natural as wine? And
yeah,
do you think this is a movement? Is it here to stay? What do you think the position of the world is?
Yeah, so I think natural wines, the way I learned about them, I'll share technically and non-technically. So non-technically, when you go to a wine bar, you see maybe like a pet nat on the menu or something that's like unfiltered, or even the word natural wine being next to the particular grape variety. I just think of it as like it's as pure as the winemaker wants it to be. It hasn't been manipulated by any additional additives. Now, the technical way that I learned as far as WSET goes, and it's, nothing in, nothing out. Obviously, there are no additives, no, additional sugars or anything like that. So I think the natural wine thing, like, I get it, and I know people are very particular. Oh, I only drink natural wine. I'm like, okay, but it's lower in alcohol, like it's kind of funky, like you're getting a sense of what that grape variety could be like, but you're not getting the entire experience of it if it were, just a regular wine with a couple sulfates in it, or if it was, sitting in an oak barrel for a couple years. You're just kind of getting that first stage of it.
Have a listen to Kira Batola. I have had many, many conversations with women winemakers in this career, and this is one passionate, interesting woman who studied the history of wine in order to get her perspective on what she wanted to make. Fascinating story. It's out now on Wine Talks with Paul Kate. How much time did Whitsett, or I always say Whitsett, but WSET, when you studied for your level 3, which is a very, very accomplished place to be in that category.
Yeah, thank you.
What did they say? Was it a section? Was it a chapter? Was it on the test? What were they calling it? Because, the feds have no definition. They don't even have a definition for natural food. So if you see that bagel bag or whatever it is, it says natural, it doesn't really mean anything. So based on the definition I just heard, if I'm a winemaker, I'll call it natural, but I might add mega purple or something, and I'll still call it natural because I think mega purple. So there's really no baseline. But what does WSET say about it?
Yeah, honestly, when it comes to like the technical term, you see more the term biodynamic rather than natural.
Sure.
And biodynamic really speaks to, as you know, the farming practices. So that can kind of confuse an everyday consumer. If they, hear biodynamic, they probably automatically associate it with natural, but you could farm biodynamically, but still make wine traditionally. If that, makes sense with the consumer kind of, it's like, oh, it's natural, like that's better for me. And it's like, not quite. Like, wine is still alcohol at the end of the day, and we do have to enjoy it in moderation per, any physician that would tell you that.
Yeah, you say that, but then you're talking about this 1 liter bottle you bought in Washington, and so that's, a whole other glass out of a bottle. But you
Right, exactly.
Right. It's easy. Well, here's my take. What's old is new again. Wine has always been natural. I mean, it's pretty modern that we were adding things. The Bordelais, I think, invented the sulfur, dusting like in the 50s or 60s. I mean, it's not, that's pretty young. And so winemakers from Burgundy and Bordeaux and the early Napa, they only knew natural.
Right.
So I sometimes look at it that's like an excuse for somebody to make, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but inferior wine because it tastes like kombucha or something, and just write it off as natural, because I think it's, farming's natural. It's just you're a farmer, but to get away with stuff that I don't want to muscle something down because I think it's good for me. Is it good for me? I mean, you think it's good for you?
I think wine in general is good for everyone who are over the age of 21. Okay, so like starting there, like if you're over 21, do that. But as far as like, you also just kind of have to think, wine does have sugar, and depending on how the winemaker decides, I should say, they want to make their wine, they can have all the additives in the world, but is natural wine good for you? Like, if you like just, that very funky kind of kombucha vibe, then that's your thing. Like, I myself drink natural wine in moderation. I keep in mind if, I have friends who enjoy low ABV, like that's usually what I pick up for them, but I enjoy a 13.5, 14.9 on a given day.
Have at it.
Yeah.
The alcohol volume, I don't think people realize, and I was just turning my head because the book by Morley Safer, not the Morley Safer, but the story that Morley Safer released in 1990 about the Mediterranean diet, which reported that red wine was, good for your heart, which, many heart surgeons or many heart doctors, cardiologists will tell you that it's almost a prescription to have some red wine. But, what always cracks me up about the lower volume of alcohol, there's always been low alcohol wines. There's always been Riesling from Germany, lots of places in the world that they're naturally lower, 9 to 10%. But I think if you showed a consumer like a 750 milliliter bottle of wine and what 13.5%, how much volume of alcohol that is, which is like, this much
Right.
versus, the 11%, which is like maybe, that much less.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really irrelevant when it comes to,
Exactly.
but with climate change, the alcohol volume's going up a little bit. So when did this happen for you? I mean, you studied at Syracuse, you graduated 2011 with a BA in marketing and management. That doesn't say wine anywhere in that credential or experience. When did that happen?
So I do have to credit my time at Syracuse for when I fell in love with wine. So there actually on campus was a wine appreciation course that your senior year, once you were 21, you were able to sign up for. Every spring semester, the class was booked. So I was like, okay, well, I'll be able to take that. But I did study abroad in Spain going to my senior year. And during that time, not only, was I going to different restaurants and having fiestas and drinking lots and lots of sangria, but there also was an opportunity for us to go visit a winery. And so that was really the moment for me that everything started to kind of come together. I hopped off I guess we had like taken some sort of like bus there, and I was just enamored by the vines. I was like blown away by, and it was, just a simple Spanish winery. Like you saw them everywhere, but I was just like, wow, like they're pairing the wines with cheese and they're showing us how the wine is aging. Like my 21-year-old self was blown away. And then came back, graduated, moved to DC. There was a show on ABC called Scandal starring Kerry Washington. And at the time, what was popular about that show was that she would drink wine out of these really big, beautiful glasses, which we would go to find out they're from Crate and Barrel. They're like $12. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I saw myself in her weirdly. Like, I was like, I live in DC. I'm not a fixer. Like, I'm not a politician, but like I can get that similar glass and I can go to the grocery store and get me a great bottle of wine for $8 or $9 or Trader Joe's.
Yeah, sure.
And that was really kind of what started with the introduction of Instagram. I would like take a picture of the wine and the bottle and talk about it. I had no idea what I was talking about at the time. I was like, yeah, this is what I'm tasting. Enjoy. And that kind of just really started the journey for me. And that was like 10 years ago. Crazy enough.
Wow.
But yeah.
Well, everybody has that moment. I've said this before on the show. Mine took a long time. I was in this business since I was a child, but I was stocking the shelves and helped my dad at the store. And then when I bought it from him in 88, it was business. It was direct mail. It was the first DTC company in the country. But it was, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
The lifestyle is exciting. Do you remember what winery you happened to visit and what part of New York it was in? Was it Long Island? I don't know where.
No, so yeah, when I was in Spain, it was called Martu. It's like Bodega Martu. And that for me was like, and I would love to go back and just kind of like visit it again, but I think we were either I'd have to look it up, but we were on our weekend trip to Andalusia or Barcelona, going in one of those directions. So that was it was Spanish wine that kind of dropped it for me. But then in New York, there's a ton of wine bars and wine shops that I would frequent. I spent some time in DC. Another place where I would say like my love for wine started to grow, worked for a Latin American wine shop in the Shaw neighborhood for a little bit. And that was really, all of these experiences started to just add up. And I had to tell myself, like, this isn't just a hobby. Like, there's something here. And it just took me a while to figure out what it was. And once I did, I was just like, okay.
So this was, I didn't catch that you were maybe on a semester abroad or something, and that should get Spain. And of course, in Spain, being the history of wine, and it's,
right.
There's so many different districts, and it's really a fabulous place to experience this. But there's something about the lifestyle of wine, and I say this on the show before, it's hard to make money in this business all the way around when you're making or selling or whatever you're doing. But man, the people you meet and the places you go and the food you eat, it makes up for the rest, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so let's move into this, the barriers that you think people of color, women have had getting into this industry? Because I go back to a woman in Napa Valley in the 40s and then the 50s. Her name was Joanne Dupuy. I've told the story many times, but she was the first woman ever to present in front of the Napa Valley Vineyards Association, like in the 60s. So I would kind of give her the nod as being one of the earlies, at least in the American history of wine. But it's been, it's a aristocratic industry. At least it has been. It's not as much as it was, but certainly I'm wearing this patch here. Look at this patch. This is from 1975.
Oh, wow.
It's my dad's patch when he was president of the Les Amis de Vin group, which was just a, American group of wine enthusiasts that got together all over the country and shared wine. But that looks pretty official, right? I mean, this is,
yeah,
this, I don't have a patch, so I'm not involved, right?
Right.
For you, has there been, have you felt a barrier to getting into this for writing and things, or experience with you as a woman?
Yeah. So I think, honestly, when I decided that I wanted to write specifically about wine back in 2016, there definitely, because I didn't see anybody, one, who looked like me, who had a lot of bylines, or, was a staff writer at, let's say, a wine publication or a wine media organization. So really for me, it was like, okay, well, we'll blog about it. Like, we'll, just I'll ask my friends to, share blog posts, to tweet them out, share them on Facebook, whatever. And for me, breaking into actual, I'd say, beverage writing, it came with, not getting paid for my work at first, which, I mean, in hindsight, that was at the time where blogging was still taking off. Freelance writers, of course, they've existed for decades, but, writing specifically about beverage and alcohol beverage, and that, for me, not having the background, it was just like, okay, I need to figure out, who do I know, or how can I DM this person on Instagram or Twitter, and just trying a lot of research on my end. So my first official byline was a recipe for Hennessy sangria that a friend had told me about at the time. And yeah, I was like, okay, I'll submit this. This is definitely going to be the first, and it was such a big deal for me. And I had my friend, we had used her kitchen to take photos and use the natural light. And I mean, we were taste testing at 9:00 in the morning, but that was besides the point. We had to get the job done. And that was my first real step into writing and submitting content for a publication. So I think once I got over that hurdle, everything, started to kind of slowly but surely come together. There were a couple years where I wasn't specifically writing about wine, but I was still getting bylines, which was important for me to be able to go to these wine publication editors and be like, hey, I haven't written about wine specifically, but I'm interested in it, but here's my proof that I can write for the internet. And so that was really the biggest hurdle for me, being able to do that.
I keep coughing away, but and I used to have a cough button here. I can turn it off, but I don't. I speak to a lot of women. I speak to a lot of people of color. There's some really interesting stories out there about the barriers and the problems. And you mentioned something important. That's the lifestyle of this industry.
Mm-hmm.
It's very attractive looking from the outside in. And in a couple of your articles, you talk about the diaspora of, and I'm not sure, what country of origin the diaspora you're talking about. I'm Armenian. We have an American diaspora is a very important thing. And for me, the diaspora is sort of a cultural transition from our native lands to the American and the Western culture, right? So we could look back and say, wow, that's pretty indigenous stuff going on over there, but here we have wine and we have food, and we're cuisine's changing. We get to experience that, and we may want to share that with our indigenous friends back in the homeland. But we're here, we're doing this, and so I think it's a great cultural transition for us to be able to participate in that. And you've had conversations with, I see an article with David Wade, the NBA player who's got a wine. I want to talk about that right now. And I had a conversation with John Sally, who was in my office here not too long ago. Well, it's been a few years. He was selling wine, actually. And it was an interesting, funny story. I'll tell you that in a second. But so tell me about, does it take a celebrity like David Wade to engage, particularly a family like the Pallmeyers, to make wine and to educate the culture, your culture, that this environment is safe for us. It's industrious for us. We can survive in here. We can work in here. We can write in here. We can enjoy the same things as that maybe our ancestors didn't. Is that what it takes, or can we do it? Can anybody do it?
That's an interesting question, and I think over the last several years, people like Dwayne Wade and the McBride sisters, and the McBride sisters and Andre Houston Mack and so many other people. Kim Lewis, you mentioned earlier, down in New Orleans, Tonya Pitts. Just there's so many different men and women who have been able to be shining examples that no matter what area of the industry, you want to pursue, whether it is marketing or writing or actual winemaking, you can do it. And I think it doesn't take a celebrity. It's nice. Like, Dwayne Wade's wines are amazing. I love the work that he's doing in the space. I think, celebrity wines come and go. Brad and Angelina had their wine, but they had a nasty falling out because of divorce. And you see all these different celebrities making tequilas and vodkas and whatever the like. But I think what the Black community or Black Americans, what they've had to see over the last several years, I'll say 10 to 15 years, they've had to just see that it's possible. And then be like, okay, well, if this woman in Brooklyn can own a wine shop, then I can open one in Oakland, or I can open one in Dallas. And that's really what serves as inspiration. I mean, even seeing for me, someone like Julia Coney, like Dorothy J. Gator, like being able to see that they, write about wine and still do it and have been doing it for years. That was inspiration for me to be like, okay, once I figured out that there were Black women writing specifically about wine, I was like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it too. And then put my own kind of, energy and personality behind it. So yeah, it's twofold. Yes, it's cool to see people like, the Dwayne Wade, the McBride sisters of the world doing their thing and rising and elevating in this industry. But it's also cool to, have Instagram influencers like Desiree Brown, Harrison Brown, or Isis Daniel be able to use their platforms and grow their audiences and teach us about wine too.
So fascinating opportunity, and I think you nailed it. The social platforms have given us everybody an opportunity to do that and express their opinions. The celebrity wine thing, whether it's Dwayne Wade or I'll tell you about John Sally here. This story is very funny. When I was at one point, there were 16 golfers, for instance, that had wines. Annika Sort, women, men, and now only one, and that was Greg Norman, who actually has a winery and actually participates in the process, which sounds like Dwayne participates in the process of what these things are going to be and what they're going to taste like. And it's not a very pedigreed place to make them, so that's very good. But so John Sally comes in, and he's like 6'10" or something. I'm looking at him, and he's got a wine called the vegan wine, vegan fine wine. I can't remember the name exactly, but it had vegan in it. And he was made a Clos de Chance in the Central Valley. And he says, I'm having a hard time selling this into the steakhouses. I'm like, well, it's a vegan wine.
Right. Not sure that's going to work there.
I said, well, because I had to put my thumb over the name when I pour the bottle, because it was really good wine. I bought the wine for the club. It was really good. But we had a great conversation because, he played for the Lakers. I was born in Inglewood. And you had a conversation in one of your articles. You talked to a woman who has a wine bar in Inglewood. Is she still there? And how's it going for her? And is SoFi Stadium helping her out, or do you stay in contact with her?
It's a pair of sisters that own 1010 wine bar and events in Inglewood, the first wine bar in Inglewood.
Wow.
And I've heard from friends who live in LA who were like, oh my gosh, I love this spot. It's such a vibe. It's so cool. So they've been in business, I think, for a year and a half at this point, and they're doing well. Like,
pretty good.
They were actually one of the stops on the Wade Cellars tour that they did, the Epicurean tour they did from coast to coast over the last couple months. So it's really been cool to see different styles of wine establishments pop up across the country. And knowing that, just like there's different types of grape varieties, and they're made in different ways, like every establishment, whether it be in California or in Illinois or in New York, they're all different. I mean, yeah, there's some of the same wines maybe on the shelves, but the energy of the store may be different. The way that they do their programming could be different. But it's been really cool to see that particular spot and to see sisters, like another sister duo, do their own thing in this wine space.
My dad's first pharmacy was at Manchester and Van Ness,
Ooh,
which you did
very
not
cool.
have. You did not have wine shops in that neighborhood at that time. And so, the interesting thought though that you just brought up, which is the different vibe that maybe somebody brings to the table, like a Dwayne Wade for their wines, or the sisters with their wine shop. Is that something that we need to be doing in this industry? Because you're young, you're looking at it with fresh eyes. I've been doing this too long. That the millennials would respond to it, because we know that they're not drinking as much wine. They're drinking White Claw right now. And you had an article about the millennials and wine, so you can pull off of that information.
Mm-hmm.
But do we need to present this industry and the value of a good glass of wine to the millennials differently than what the tradition is?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, I mean, for years now. I think once I learned that I was in the millennial generation, I think that became a buzzword. Like back in like 2011, 2012, that's something that's always kind of been in the back of my mind. And what I think both my generation and the industry, whether it's wine, spirits, beer, tech, whatever, we're starting to get older. So we are in our mid 30s. We're, in our early 40s. Throwing a party around wine is great, but I know sometimes I just like to stay at home, or I like to go out to a nice dinner. I think having variety when it comes to like a particular environment or an atmosphere is important for my generation. I think the generation that needs to be kind of spotlighted right now as they get older is Gen Z. Because as much as, it's been cool for all industries to focus on millennials. Like I said, we're getting older. We're starting to kind of have different palettes for different things, but it's really Gen Z, I think, that needs to get that attention as far as like, okay, would you want to go to a Ruth Chris or, a really nice upscale restaurant? Here's how you, not behave, but here's how you read a wine menu. If you want to go to your local wine bar, don't be afraid to ask the person behind the bar, what's, where is this wine from? And a lot of there's actually a wine bar is it Silver Lake? It's called Bandini.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of cool natural wines. Yeah. And on the menu, it's like, this is this type of wine and it's from here. And that kind of just gets your wheels turning a little bit, like, oh, what makes this wine so cool and why did y'all decide to put it on the menu? So I think it really is just continuing to give the millennial generation agency and permission to ask questions and to enjoy what they like, but also putting a little focus on Gen Z as they, cross the threshold of turning 21 and being like, hey, like, you can put the White Claw down for a little bit, or, enjoy it in the summertime. But, here's an opportunity to really, expand your palate if you can't travel to Napa, or if you can't go to Italy for the summer and taste wines, straight from the barrel.
I made the huge mistake of teaching my daughter and her son, her husband, my son-in-law, at least one of them, who was an engineer here for a little bit, so he heard all these stories as they were happening about champagne. Good shit.
Oh,
now it's costing me a fortune.
I'm sure it is.
And they're millennials. So what intrigues me is that they've learned this glass, whatever the glass is, has value in it. And if you want to take the time to understand it, it is fascinating. And the next glass will be just as fascinating if you give it a chance. But in the article about millennials that you wrote, and you're talking about this news anchor or journalist drinking 19 crimes. Now, I joke about that all the time. I think the only crime is that they put it in the bottle. So, but that's a whole. So, what do we do about these? How do we get the millennials, the Gen Zs, to have a glass of something Spanish, let's say from the Rioja, the Ribera del Duero, that is interesting and curated by the winemaker because he cared or she cared, versus grabbing Josh or Cali Red from Snoop Dogg off of the shelf. What do we do? Is this a hand sell basically?
Yeah, that's a great question because I'm with you. Like, I have friends who are like, yeah, I love, or I'll be like overhearing. They may talk low because they don't want me to jump into the conversation.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I love like Josh. I love right. She's gonna judge all my friends and family. I'm like, I don't want to bring wine because you're gonna judge me. I'm like, you're probably right, but
Yes. Sorry.
I think I kind of take it on. I make it part of my responsibility being in this industry and being able to have access to not only just delicious wine, but the wines that are also affordable that aren't, always readily available at your Target or your Kroger or your Albertsons. It's kind of up to those of us who are in this industry now to just pivot like, hey, you like 19 crimes, we'll try this. Like, think about the grape variety and, maybe draw another region. It doesn't have to always be California. No shades, California. Love California wine. But, like you said, there's the Douro, there's Dow, and there's so many different parts of the world. And even in America, like, I think a lot of millennials think they have to go to Napa to, achieve wine, which yes, you will achieve wine greatness in Napa, Sonoma, but think about going a little north to the Willamette. Think about going to Walla Walla. Thinking about going a little bit more north to the Okanagan Valley. Like, there's so many amazing opportunities in North America alone that I think millennials and Gen Z, they just have to be exposed to it. And so I'm trying to do my best, using tools like Instagram and YouTube, and even with my own writing to be like, hey, like, try this. It's from here. And guess what? It's the same price as 19 crimes, but better.
I get, I guess actually that's a pretty good point that the platforms, which weren't around in the 70s when White Zinfandel became popular, Bob Trinchero making An Accident and producing this, and it became so popular. And I think this is really a theoretical question I asked you, because those wines are necessary to bring maybe the non-wine drinker to the table. That's a little sugared up, a little extra color, a little whatever, a little more fruit, and all of a sudden that starts not feeling so good anymore. You introduce the idea through a blog or through a post or a video, whatever, a virtual tasting that, hey, there's this is called Ribera del Duero. This is Tempranillo. That's really great. And all of a sudden they go, yeah, I want to try that. And they have that moment that maybe there's something else to this. And then we got them hooked, and then we drag and we make their life miserable because there's something new around the corner.
And they're spending all the money. Like, that's really the circle of life. Like, that is exactly. And that's what excites me, though. Like, when I introduce a friend or a family member to something that they fall in love with, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I love this for you. And then they keep coming back to me for more recommendations. I'm like, there's a wine store around the corner from you that you should definitely check out and spend your money there. And, just kind of keep this cycle going. But yeah, once I get people in, it's hard to get them out.
And I call you, wake up. I got this wine. Yeah. Like they do to me, they text me from like dinner. They're in Italy and they're having dinner. What do you think? Like, you're on vacation. What are you texting me for? Pay attention to your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend. So,
exactly.
And a movement now is a sustainable movement, which I think the sustainable movement is really important. I think if all the industries in the world, wine should be one of the leaders in sustainable movement because of the agricultural product that is and the way it impacts the environment. I don't think what a lot of people understand is how slow this industry is. You only get one chance a year. Every 12 months, something changes. And if you want to become certified sustainable, which I don't think is necessary as long as you're doing it. But I think that's an important thing. Did you?
I 100% agree. I think it enables people to want to know more about where their wine comes from. And I think we hear the two words climate change so much, and the impact that it is going to have on, not just the air that we breathe or the water we drink, but also how we get our food, how we get the wine that we love so much. I have a really good friend who loves champagne, and it might have been, it was last winter around this time actually. She's like, I had to drive all over LA to try to find a bottle of she loves what is it, Volver, Perrier, one of the two. She's like, I had to go, yeah. She was like, I have to drive all over to try to find them. Like, I should probably not do this, but I'm going to tell you about grower champagne. She's like, what? So I was like, you're going to spend a little bit more money, but I promise you, if you go to a specialized wine shop, like, you'll have kind of like, an expansive view. So that, even doing something like that is just putting a seed into, a friend's head or a consumer's head, like, oh, like, why is this particular champagne so important? How does the environment and how does the climate impact the stuff that I like to drink so much? And how can I support this particular producer so that I can continue to get this wine that I love so much? So I love the fact that a lot more wine companies and brands and producers are like, yeah, like, we are, supporting sustainability by, recycling water on our property, or we're, changing the way we, our closures, or, our farming practices. And like you said, the industry is slow. And that's not a bad thing, but it's also like, even getting certain certifications to be deemed sustainable or biodynamic, they take years because they have to follow how seasons change. And so I think it's important for consumers to recognize and to know how their wine is made, but also to give even more support to those who are following sustainability practices and choosing to farm in a way that's going to leave the land better than they found it.
I just had an epiphany when you were describing that, because you're right on. But I'm still going to taste. I'm still going to drink what I liked to taste first, and then, hey, if I have a choice, it is sustainable. Yeah. But Graham, because most wines really are, besides the things you see on the shelf that are doctored up, like Cali Red and all that. But most estate wines of repute are minimally attacked anyway. I mean, the conversation I have with many winemakers from Europe, particularly state winemakers, are saying, look, my kids are planting that vineyard. I don't want pesticides in my house. Right. In fact, somebody said the other day, and I brought this up on a show recently, well, that was a fascinating concept, which is not only do my kids plant this vineyard and bring home herbicides, insecticides, and pesticides, but the dog goes out there, right? And then the kid crawling around the house, the infant, it puts his nose or her nose in the dog's fur. And now I've got, pesticides. I'm like, okay, that's
right. Right.
I think it's an important thing. And like I said earlier, it wasn't always like that. Climate change has done a lot. And this is not a political show, so we don't get into how the climate is changing. But this 2 or 3 degrees has changed the sustainability of farms, how they trellis their vines, how they're going to water them. But it's done something interesting, and that's created some pretty good districts out of places that never grew wine before.
Right.
Or when they did, it wasn't very good, like Dorset, England or something, or parts of Burgundy that are now getting sunshine, their heat that they didn't get before, and the grapes are more ripe. So it's kind of interesting. Actually, you mentioned Veuve Clicquot, just for your own fun. There's a great book by Tilar Mazio on the subject. A fascinating woman in wine. I mean, if you want to go back, and this woman was an entrepreneur. She's a businesswoman. She was a risk taker. She was an innovator. She invented the idea of labeling wine in the first place. I mean, it's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
And you missed the book is the same color as the Veuve Clicquot.
The bottle.
But she's a fascinating artist, a writer. So they just came out with news that Vincent Morrow of the Press Restaurant in Napa Valley became the Somm of the Year at Decanter, and I think a couple of organizations, a man of color. And you brought it up a little bit while we were talking, and that is to talk to the people that you're, wherever you're at. Let's say at the wine shop,
Hmm.
Some of the supermarkets actually have department managers that take care of the quality. There was one in my neighborhood. She was fabulous. I wanted to hire her. She was so passionate about what was on the shelf.
Hmm.
But here, there's a man of color that joins one of the most prestigious restaurants in America, and has been noted for what he's done to the list. And it's fascinating to see. And I want to get him on the show, actually. But the point being, if you and I haven't tasted what they're pitching, then you have to ask somebody. Maybe that's the intimidation factor, that I get the wine list and I don't know what I'm looking at, but I'm afraid to ask the guy, ask the girl.
Yeah.
Does that play out?
I mean, a lot of consumers do find that when they go to, nice restaurants or even their local, some of their local eateries, and there's a long list of wines and countries next to them that maybe they don't recognize. They're like, okay, so I'm just going to stick to my, Pinot Grigio. I'm going to stick to my Sauvignon Blanc because that's, what I know. But I tell people all the time, please, please, please ask your som, ask your server, ask the bartender, whomever is serving you the alcohol, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to know what's in the glass, where it came from, of course, how much it is. But I think there is an intimidation factor, particularly here in America. And because we talk about wine culture in our country, it's still fairly young. Like, I mean, wine has been coming to, being imported to the States for centuries, but actually having specialized wine bars and wine shops and places where you can go and visit and travel to. I mean, Holly, people have been doing that probably, like you said, since the 50s. And so it's still a relatively new concept in America to pair food with wine beyond red wine and steak or white wine and fish. Like, we're still learning as an American culture how to embrace wine, even beyond, certain things like dinners or fancy restaurants. So I think there's really an opportunity for the industry to take hold of this newness, and not just people who've been in the industry for years and years, but new drinkers, those who've been enjoying wine for, a decade. How can you approach this kind of newness and take advantage of where our culture is, our country's culture is when it comes to wine?
It's an interesting point, particularly with Vincent Morrow, who went in to revamp this list. And, after COVID, there's been a lot of changes in wine lists. Restaurateurs have, had to buckle down a little bit, completely whacked our industry out.
Yeah.
And Tanya Pitts in particular, who had to go in and reduce her list from like 1,000 bottles to like 600, knocking out 40%. So you have to be pretty keen on what you've got there. And to ask that question, and an interesting example is let's just take Napa. Napa's hard for most people to differentiate a Rutherford from an Oakville from an Oak Knoll. And because it is hard. It's not as nuanced as Bordeaux, in my opinion, but I could be wrong. So if you go to Napa, you're used to Napa. I had people that come in our shop all the time to buy Caymus, they buy Silver Oak, because those are the brands, and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the branding. But stylistically, they're pretty straightforward. They're pretty big wines, a lot of fruit. You sense Cabernet, but, there's nothing totally nuanced about it. And I was up there a few weeks ago, and I had a wine with a woman named Sharon Kazan-Harris of Rare Cat, and she gave me a bottle of her Napa Cab, and I brought it home, and the first thing I did, I go, wow, what structure, what acid structure. We don't see this in Napa. And I wrote her immediately saying, this is fabulous expression that's not part of the mainstream. And that's kind of cool, right? That we share those things, that a somm like Vincent can say, look, yeah, you can buy the Caymus, but I've tasted this.
Absolutely. And that, I think, again, just gives consumers something else to explore, not just, at dinner, but they can head up to Napa and just kind of find out about, the different AVAs that exist up there, and winemakers like the one you mentioned who are taking very traditional grape varieties like Cab Sav and expressing them in a different way. That's so cool.
It's really fun. He signs on with the press. He's done amazing work. He's part of the inclusivity group at WSET, or the Court of Master Sommeliers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to see that. It's good to see the breakout and get people interested in raising an interest in the idea. And he's signed on to a restaurant that's also transitioning from a traditional steakhouse into a Michelin-starred restaurant. Ooh. And it's really fascinating. And that's another industry that's very interesting to me. I've studied the cuisine of America, and you and I have a separate show about that. But my daughter's in the trade. She's a woman who's French trained, and she was going to join a group of women out of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm struggling with the name of the restaurant and the chef, but we met her at an event in Washington, D.C., and she gave me her card. And, of course, like my daughter's normal, she lost the card.
Oh, no.
But she was starting an organization for women in the kitchen, because it's such a brutal industry, and there's so lack of respect, at least still it seems to be, for women in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Let's face it, there was the food industry and hospitality of food was male dominated. It still kind of is in France. Julia Child, kind of broke the barrier, but that was a long time ago, and it's taken a long time. And you work with an organization called BWIF, and Black Women in Food.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me about some of those headwinds and some of the things that you guys are doing to open those barriers.
Yeah, so that particular honor, I would say, so Dine Diaspora is the organization, and every year they honor about 20 to 22 Black women across hospitality. So food, beverage, you name it, and how they are showing up in those particular areas. And so what I admire so much about Dine Diaspora is that not only are they elevating Black women who are farmers, who are in the kitchens and are sous chefs or executive chefs, but also women like me who are amplifying the work that those women are doing in the industry. I think just really what they focus on as an organization is amplification, is really uplifting Black women, no matter what part of the hospitality industry they may be in, just making those women and those faces and those names known, which I completely admire. I know this year I'll actually be serving as a judge for the upcoming, women who will be selected. So I'm really excited just to be able to continue recognizing Black women in and out of the kitchen, who are doing things for the community and making sure that, generations to come recognize that they can cook, they can serve wine, they can make really awesome cocktails if they choose to do that. Whatever the case may be, they can, be beverage directors, work in the front of house, however they see fit, it's possible.
I think it's really important. I think the food industry, I'm fascinated by it myself, having a daughter that's in it, and I see the back house and what happens, and it's such a dominated male experience still, really. And we were at Bodega in Napa, and sitting next to these two women, and at some point, my wife's on my right, and the two women on my left. I don't know if you've ever been to Bodega in Yountville, but it's a really cool Italian place.
Ooh,
I could share it.
I don't mind. Yeah.
So we're sitting at the bar and having a drink. And the woman goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was so rude. I didn't engage you." And I said, like, whatever, So I gave her my card. I'm a podcaster on this club, whatever. Oh, well, these were men hater. These two were both men haters. And, we were talking, and I was just challenging a little bit of some of the stuff that I know about some of this part of this industry. And finally, her only response to me was, "Well, you're a white male." Well, that's all you got? Because, you can't defend the argument I'm trying to...
Right.
But we had a fabulous conversation. It was actually very interesting. And I totally get the headwinds that are out there, because chefing, and I think this for young Black women, young Black men, chefing doesn't have the luster that it has in Europe. Like you shouldn't even think about being a chef unless you go to Europe. Even today, maybe not as much as it was 10 or 15 years ago, to France and work to learn those nuances and what a real kitchen runs like. But still, you have to be able to hold a beacon up for the kids to look at and say, yeah, that looks pretty cool. I mean, for you said that looks pretty cool. I went to this winery in Spain, and that was pretty cool. And,
right.
And to allow the dreams to exist, to do it, and to work hard. Because are you trying to tell them it's not hard work? I mean, right?
No, it's definitely challenging. I think, we talk about this industry, and several people have talked about, like, yeah, it's not, you're not going to, walk into the wine industry, make like $1 bajillion in one day. Like, while that'd be great, it definitely takes a very long time. And it's really, I think one of the questions you had sent me was talking about passion and like, what is it that really drives people in particular to this industry? And for me, it's storytelling. It's really, how can I write something? How can I, verbally, or how can I talk about wine in a way that makes people want to get up, go out and buy it, or that makes them want to research it or go visit this particular part of Italy or Spain or wherever. And really holding on to that, no matter how cutthroat the industry may be, no matter how, especially media, how much it's changing year after year, figuring out what it is that keeps your passion on fire. And even as things change, continue to move in that direction, because the people will come. Wine has been around forever, and people are always going to be drinking it, in my opinion.
I think that's the key. I think that's the key to all of it. And I mentioned Chiara Battaglia, who I was on the show we just released, and she's the first winemaker that I've ever spoken with that had this serious interest in the history of wine, going back 8,000 years. I don't know if you know that they found a winery in Armenia, 6,000 years old, with the shoes and the amphora still completely intact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. But had used that sort of history to decide how she was going to approach where she was making. Do you find, in general, like you go to dinner with some friends or you go to a party and the conversation kind of always ends up about wine, and if you're not being obnoxious and aristocratic about it, you can. It's sort of a non-threatening conversation to hold. In other words, you don't talk about politics or relationships or anything. You can just talk about wine. And aren't people interested in hearing what you have to say?
They're fascinating. I'm like, you guys are really holding on to every one of my words, and like, this is strange. But it's also just like, and my friends always were like, Chasity, you light up when you talk about it. I'm like, really? They're like, yeah. I'm like, you kind of nerd out in, what I'm talking about, like the structure of the wine, or the really cool place I got to visit, and the type of food that I ate with this particular wine. It is a non-threatening conversation. I want people, everyday consumers, to hold on to that and be like, I can walk into my wine shop confidently and buy, if my budget is limitless, okay, we'll spend $160 on a bottle of wine if you want to, but it doesn't have to be threatening. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It's such I think, like you said, non-threatening beverage, and we enjoy each other's company around it. I cannot tell you, it's a huge key. I can't tell you the last time I went to an event and there wasn't bottles and bottles of wine, and it just kind of sparked something for someone to talk about the label or where it's from, or even the alcohol content.
I think that's, and I've not yet, no one on the show has been able to define that space between what a complicated, expressive wine does to a soul. And I think it's deep rooted in the human spirit attaching itself to the earth, because that's where it's from. You don't geek over wine from pineapples. You can go to Maui Blanc and get Maui Blanc, and it's just it's fine. You don't geek over Catawba. You don't geek over the Concord wine from Kentucky. That's fun, and you can taste the grapes in it. But it doesn't send you someplace, when a real glass of wine should be a sense of time and place. And I guess that's the problem I have with the 19 Crimes and the rest of the stuff, is that really doesn't express that. But when it does, and you've already experienced this. And the reason I brought that comment about non-threatening to a conversation if I'm standing at a group of people and wine comes up, which it always does, I don't have to do anything because they're going to keep asking questions as long as they're interested in talking about it, as long as I'm not being arrogant about it, which, I don't know enough to be arrogant anyway. But if the conversation kind of goes on its own, it just happens. We're already on an hour, which is unbelievable. We have to do this again. But I'm going to ask you a question. Since you are a WSET 3, you've studied a lot of stuff and you've read a lot of articles, and this is a book that was written in 1974. It's I don't know if you can see it. It's called "Wine is the Best Medicine."
Okay.
He was a PhD. He's an MD, a regular internal medicine, as well as a homeopathic doctor. So he studied both in Paris. And I found this book in my dad's archives. So what it is a whole book on human maladies. Okay, so it's like depression, allergies, anemia, bronchitis, fever, gout, whatever. And then I'm going to give you 3 French wines that potentially could relieve the symptoms. And so this is not unlike the WSET or the Master of Wine or the Court of Sommeliers, which is, I think the percentage of people that get this answer right is exactly 1/3. I give you 3 answers, so it's a crapshoot. But it's the concept behind, like, why did you choose that? Right? So champagne has a certain character of the bubbles, or it's made with certain grapes. So maybe there's a logic behind choosing champagne as the cure over something else. But so here's the question, and we'll just have some fun with this. Let's say you want to lose some weight, as we all do. You have the choice of. There's also a dosage that goes with this question. You have the choice of a dry champagne, a Sancerre, or Côte de Beaune Rouge. You have 3 choices: a Sancerre, a dry champagne, or Côte de Beaune Rouge, a Burgundy, Pinot Noir.
I'm gonna say the Sancerre, and the reason why is because I know, and it's gonna sound so nerdy, but like. You think about how long champagne has to sit and the sugar that it's accumulating. You think about, again, the red wine, how long it's sitting and the sugar, and that's not going to help you lose weight. But a dry Sancerre, it's good. It's more than likely going to be lean. It's definitely going to have some, pear, green apple, citrusy qualities to it. So maybe like a glass of that could help you get to your ideal weight.
Well, you're pretty smart. Actually, it says weight loss, and then it says obesity. So I went to the obesity page, and it's dry white wines from the Sancerre region. Because these wines are low in sugar.
Yeah.
You go, girl. So they also have diuretic properties. Now, I have to say your dosage is a little off because they suggest 1 bottle a day.
Wow.
And this is funny, divided between the 2 main meals. So if a bottle of champagne, Sancerre is usually 2.5 glasses, 5 glasses a bottle. So 2.5 glasses during a meal isn't that extravagant.
Yeah.
So, but then I realized that right next to obesity is old age. So that's for me, and that happens to be red wines from the Lacs Coton. So I've got to spend a lot of money on red Burgundy to counteract my old age. But anyway, it's worth the trip, right?
That absolutely, and that book seems so much fun. I'm going to have to try to find it. That's awesome.
So wine is the best medicine. I got it on eBay, actually. I got another copy on eBay, so I'm sure you can find it. I've been trying to find the French version because it was written in French the first time around. Anyway, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show, and I hope we can do it again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Paul. This was awesome.
You mentioned that you knew the Silver Lake story. Are you in California ever then?
I was in California a lot pre-pandemic. Have some friends out there, but I will be in California. So I'm actually starting my diploma next week. Yeah, so I'll have to come to Napa, take my exams. And then I'm going to slide down to Southern California and see some friends. But yeah, I spent about 3 weeks in LA last summer, just hanging out with one of my friends from college and catching some sun, because although, we have beautiful summers here in Chicago, they do not, amount to the sun in SoCal. So I was just enjoying myself out there.
Well, we had friends visit once from Michigan, and it was like, for us, it was cold that day. It was like today, like probably in the 60s, but sunny. And we got home from wherever we were, my wife and I, and they're lying in our backyard on towels. I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, are you kidding? This is like sunbathing for us.
Exactly.
I do hope that if we're near LA, you'll look us up. We're very close to Silver Lake. We're probably 10 minutes away, or downtown. We're about 15, 20 minutes away. Love to tilt the glass with you and show you around if we have that opportunity when you're here.
Absolutely.
And there's something else I was going to say now. I forgot what it was. We'll let you know when this is released, and you'll get all the links and stuff. So we hope you re-release it as well.
Yeah.
And let's have some fun together when you're here. And if I'm in Chicago, I'll do the same.
Please, yes, let me know. This was so awesome, Paul. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
All right.
Cheers. And send us that file. Thank you.